All right, good morning, everybody. All right, come on, one more time. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Awesome. Well, I have to say, I am so happy that all of you have decided to spend your valuable time to be here with us this morning. You know, when we decided we were looking at different dates and we picked a date in the summer, there was a lot of stress among the team around would people be willing to come and show up. We also doubled the admissions price to come. And I think that there was a concern among everyone that maybe there would be 3 people sitting right up here that I would be presenting to. And I'm so happy to announce that we had a 20% growth in the number of attendees from the last time we did this to this. Before I jump into my presentation, I want to thank all of our sponsors, especially our platinum sponsors, without whom this show would not be possible. So what I want to go through with you for the next 45 minutes is really 2 things. First, I want to talk a little bit more about where we've been. How are we doing in terms of this big, broad vision that I first introduced at the last summit? But then I want to take a slightly different tack and talk about a bigger trend that we're seeing in the industry that we're all very much part of. So I hear there are a few geeks in the audience. For those of you who are geeks, does anybody know what we're talking about in that slide at the top left-hand corner of the screen? Someone shout it out. ARPANET, very good. And the 2 gentlemen below it? All right, perfect. The 2 gentlemen invented TCP. And you know, before we talk about anything else, I think it's important to start with a little bit of context, which is what I think that many people in this room understand, but very few people outside of this room understand, is that our modern society is built on top of networks. Yet the fundamental architecture of networks, the way that networks have managed, have for the most part not changed that much since these gentlemen started putting together the technology required for the dawn of the internet. In fact, what we've seen is that the evolution of network, rather than creating something with an idea and a vision of where it was going to go and thinking about the right architectural concepts, what we've done is we've kept adding a little bit of duct tape and a little bit of paper clips there and painting over the part that was falling apart. And it's amazing, in fact, given that that's the way that we've evolved the architecture of the internet, that that's the way that we've evolved the architecture of fundamental networking, that it does so much for us. But if you've gone to any standards conference over the last 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, it probably goes back beyond that, you've heard the same thing over and over again, which is we know that to be able to go where we know that we're going, we need a fundamental re-architecture of the network. The way that the network runs right now, again, whether we're talking public internet, whether we're talking in your business in a research institution, we know that it needs to change. And the first question is why? Well, one of the challenges when something is fragile is that you don't want to touch it. Think about for a second if you're balancing a whole set of dice up on your kitchen table and your 4-year-old walks in the room, what's the first thing that you do? Don't touch that. We're in a place where for networking, our networks are fragile enough that we don't want to make changes. In fact, making a change is risky. Making a change to the network is costly. And therefore, it's something that we avoid. And so as we move into a world in which networking touches us in almost every way, whether now we're looking up a phone number, looking up our grades, booking a holiday house, or even if we think about it, what's going on within your car today, even prior to connected cars, we're ready at a place that almost every part of our lives relies on the network. And so it is clear, I don't think there's anybody in this room that doubts the assertion that as we think forward 20 years, not only will the network be part of almost every major innovation that we will see, but that the network as it's been built today will not be able to accommodate that change unless it evolves. And so the question is how? You know, when I began, and some of you in this room began to talk about the vision of OpenDaylight. Many, many people listened and said, that sounds really great. That's a great vision. We really like it. But invariably, after a sigh, people got to the next set of questions. And they said, well, that sounds great, but, and then you got a list of questions, a list of challenges. Anybody who's spent time in a standards body like the IETF has seen effort after effort to standardize the industry around a new idea, a new technology, fail and fail over and over again. Anybody who's tried to do it by creating the next great startup that's going to disrupt all of the incumbents has had the experience, and invariably, they don't quite achieve what they were hoping to achieve. If they're successful, they get bought out and become really, really rich, but they don't change the network as we know it. What's interesting about this is the solution, when you think about it for a second, what does it take to change networking as we know it? It doesn't seem that hard. There are really 3 steps. The first one is you got to get all the right people in the room. All the people that determine it, whether they be developers, the smartest guys in the world, whether you get the people who pay their paychecks, whether you get the end users, a couple academics, throw them in a room together and you've got the right people. Okay, that doesn't seem too hard. Number 2, you've got to get them to actually build something. Because I think if we've learned anything from the experience of the years and years of these standards bodies and conferences, what we've learned is that simply writing a white paper, simply creating a PDF that we all agree on doesn't change networks. Why? Well, there are a whole set of reasons, and we could go into them. Number 1, you have to get everyone to agree, and so you're going to obfuscate, you're going to simplify, you're going to gloss over some differences. The problem is that same activity that you're doing to try to get everybody to agree is really actually just an exercise in fooling ourselves. Because unless we can actually agree, what's going to happen is people just go back to their organizations, and what do? They build it the way they want it built. And so we're not building true standards, we're pretending to build standards. Now, that's not to say that there haven't been a lot of very successful standards efforts, that there haven't been standards that have had a big impact. There have been. But standards bodies by themselves, the standards process, clearly has not been successful in helping to reinvent the way that networks are architected and managed. And this is why we are in this room. It is because I think that as an industry we have realized that it's not just enough to get people in a room to argue, that the second step is we need to get them to actually build something together. Because unlike a white paper, code is code. If you disagree on something, you can either build 2 different things, but if you build one thing, it's pretty hard for you to then split it apart. Yes, you can fork it, but that's a much bigger effort. But then what's the third step? So step 1 and 2 sounds pretty easy, right? Get everybody in a room together and get them to build something. Of course, the challenge is if what they end up building is something that isn't used by people, you just have a really nice science project. And we've seen a lot of really interesting academic exercises where people assume the world simpler than it actually is, and they build something really neat, and it works great on a couple laptops, and you go out to the real world and it falls over. And so the third step is you need to be able to engage deeply with the users of networks. And the key part here is it almost never works to say, you take your network to where I think it should be. You come to me. We have to find a way to both show a path to the future, but meet users where they are. So pretty easy, right? Get them in a room, build something, get people to use it. Well, I'll tell you, this isn't the first time that I've shared this way of doing things. And invariably, people smile and nod, and after a few polite smiles, they then say, yes, but. I can think of 3 reasons, I can think of 4 reasons, I can think of 5 reasons why that's not going to work. This sounds really, really, really hard to do right. Many of you sitting in this room are ambassadors of OpenDaylight, are ambassadors of open. And so you have been asked, you will be asked to defend, why did it make sense for you to come here today? Why do you spend your time working in OpenDaylight? Whether you're building directly our code or something on top, why do you believe in OpenDaylight? Because fundamentally, when somebody hears the dream that we have, their natural answer is it hasn't been done before. And it hasn't. It's never been done in networking. In fact, if you look in the history of IT across technologies far and wide, there have been very, very few cases where people have been able to collaborate together on a new platform. Why is that? Because just like starting a company, starting an open source project, starting a successful open source project is really, really hard. Because doing it right isn't about a license. It's about all the things that make the community actually work. And so when somebody says to you, this sounds really hard, I can think of 5 reasons that it could fail. The wrong thing to do is to say, no, 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 no. We have answers for all of that. Because the truth is that these things are hard questions because they are inherently hard. Some of you may recognize this gentleman. This is Ben Horowitz, one of the leading venture capitalists in the world. He has a wonderful book. If you haven't read it, I urge you to read it. It's about startups. It's titled The Hard Thing About Hard Things. And he makes this point that has really stuck with me, which is the hard thing about hard things is that they're hard. There are no easy answers. And so when you tackle a hard problem, when someone comes in and says, how will you get different people with different technologies? These 2 companies have invested 1.5 years, 100 people building a platform, and they have a strong reason to stay tied to it. How are you going to get them to see the greater good and to abandon that technology to actually collaborate? That sounds hard. The right answer is it is hard. It's not impossible, but it takes a heck of a lot of work. And in fact, you may not know exactly, I may not know, day one, how to actually overcome that challenge. But with a lot of hard work, each of these challenges is absolutely overcomable. 1.5 years ago, you could have looked at me and said, sounds great, you're an optimist, but I'm a realist. So let's talk a little bit about what we've done over the last 1.5 years. Because what I am seeing is of the long, long list of challenges that people have put in front of us, we've tackled an amazing amount of them. In fact, one of the top thought leaders, an inventor of one of the critical technologies everyone talks about, sat me down and said, Neela, I'm really glad you're going to do this. You're going to do a great job. I have to tell you, you're going to fail. It's just not going to work. I mean, number one, you're not going to get everybody together, but even if you do, these people want this, these people want that. They'll never collaborate. And when you go down to the engineers, they don't even agree on how things should be done. And he went through and he gave me a list of 15 questions, and I didn't know the answer to any of them. Interestingly enough, 18 months later, I know the answer to quite a few of them. So let's talk about how we've been doing. Number one, bring everybody together. How have we done? Well, I'm so proud to say that not only do we have together in one project the support of some of the largest incumbent vendors, but we've also been able to get a whole series of small companies, of small innovators together. And most recently, we've started to see end users supporting our project. In fact, this morning, I'm proud to announce that we have 3 new members of the OpenDaylight project. And I think this is just a perfect example of what we're seeing. On one hand, we have an end user, one of the end users in the world that has the most to gain from this revolution in networking, AT&T. At the same time as AT&T is expressing their support for our project, we have ClearPath Networks, a small startup focused on NFV, probably courting AT&T as a customer. And then finally, we have one of the more established vendors, someone with an illustrious history of delivering the networks for 30 years, 20 years, 10 years, Nokia. And this is exactly what we're all about. We're not a union of a whole set of large incumbents. We're not a union just of startups who want to put the incumbents out of business, nor are we a club just for end users. We're a group of collaborators trying to address a much, much bigger challenge. Now, as you talk about that, as you share with people how many people are supporting OpenDaylight, one of the natural reactions is, hey, that sounds great. They put their logo on there. Maybe they sent a little check. But what are they really doing? So let's talk about that. We got people in a room. What are they doing? A year and a half ago, we shipped our first release, Hydrogen. 154 developers contributed to that release. Just over 6 months later, we shipped Helium. We got almost 100% growth in contributors from one release to the other, and this is in less than a year. If we look at Lithium, which we just shipped last month, once again, we saw a tremendous growth. If you look at that 154 to 502, that's 300% growth in the span of just slightly more than 18 months. If we look in terms of this idea of building a broad platform, are we seeing a range of different projects, a range of different groups? Absolutely. We see the same trends in terms of number of projects in a release. Certainly, we're part of a bigger trend. It's not just OpenDaylight. I'm going to be talking more about this in the second half of my presentation. But if you look at it, similar statistics here, contributors and commits. Here what I'm looking at is the last year, the last 12 months. What you see is that there's been a tremendous investment in OpenSDN in general. And so here you look on the left side of the screen, you see there have been 674 people who have worked directly on the open source. Now, for every single one of those 674 people, there are roughly 5 people working on products based on top of it. So this is really that heart of the bigger onion. In terms of their contributions, they're not just sitting around. I had to put this other slide on there. They're not sitting around or fixing a bug. They're writing real code. You see 24,000 total commits of code have gone to OpenSDN projects. I am proud to say that developers are voting with their feet. And when they look, there are a whole set of people offering different models of OpenSDN. More often than not, they're coming to the OpenDaylight project rather than to the myriad of other options. For those of you who can't fully read, I've got Open vSwitch, Open Contrail, Onos, Ryu, and Floodlight as the other OpenSDN projects out there. Some of you may be familiar with something called Metcalfe's law, right? The value of a network increases exponentially with its size. We're seeing exactly that. And we'll talk about this in a second when we talk about the end user side. But certainly I'm seeing it with the developer landscape. When you talk to a developer who has built a product on OpenDaylight, I hear the same thing over and over again. I say, why did you choose OpenDaylight? Often their number one reason is the ecosystem. I want to make sure that I can address as many end users as possible. I want as often as possible to be able to come in, and when I say OpenDaylight, they either say, I've heard of that, I have it, or I want it. They want to make sure that there are other people working on other pieces because they don't want to create everything themselves. And so we're seeing a huge ecosystem effect, which I think is explaining the distribution of investment across the different projects. How does this translate? Well, the way that you measure the impact of a platform is first and foremost measuring how many people build on top of that platform. And so if you look at OpenDaylight today, we have over 20 commercial products that have been built on top of the OpenDaylight platform. More importantly, for those of you who have a background or an interest in physics, I recently heard the head of our TSC use this term. He said, what OpenDaylight first does for the community is it provides a cognitive annealing. This is the process by which we melt metals and join them together at a fundamental level. And we've seen that in OpenDaylight. This may seem obvious to some of you, but it's amazing how we have converged in our ideas over the last couple years. A year and a half ago, or 2 years ago, prior to OpenDaylight, if you said SDN controller, we all knew what you were talking about. You're talking about a controller speaking OpenFlow to a set of OpenFlow switches, That's pretty much every controller that had ever been built. There was SDN, and it was that thing, and we all understood it. And then there was the old world, and everything else in the old world was not SDN, and SDN was that one thing we all understood. What's been interesting is what's happened from all sides in the last couple of years. Number one, what we've heard is, you know what, this simplistic idea of the old network, the new network, and you just rip out the old, you go to the new, not quite right. We need to work with existing hardware as well as new hardware. In fact, I'd love it if everybody could agree on one hardware standard, one southbound protocol. But the truth is that's not reality, and I don't think that we'll be there. And so the first critical area in which the community has all come together is we need to be able to support multiple southbounds to connect to a whole range of hardware. On the other side, on the northbound side, it's not like there's one use case, and this is what SDN is all about. Certainly, people who've needed to focus because they have limited resources have picked one and tried to build a really nice solution for that one, or two, or three, or four. But as you look across the market, there are a whole wide range of use cases for SDN and NFV. They have some commonalities, but in many ways they're different. And so if you think of that problem, multiple use cases across a wide range of southbounds, how do you solve that? Hard code everything? No, that doesn't work. When I last stood up in front of you, the big debate was model-driven architectures. Is that the solution? Is that the answer? And you had strong people shouting at me in anger with red faces going, those guys are trying to tear apart our project. It's too complicated. It's a submarine to cross a bathtub. I don't understand it. It makes no sense. No one will ever be able to understand. And others that go, yeah, it seems really hard right now, but that's because we're in the early days. This is the right long-term solution. It's been great to see our community think about it, have the debate, and emerge from the other side saying, yes, model-driven architectures are the right way of doing it. Whether you talk to end users or whether you talk about developers, we have settled that debate, at least for now. It's worth investing in understanding model-driven architectures because it solves this problem in a fundamental way. And this is why a service abstraction layer is so critical to a platform for SDN, a platform for NFV. And so where we are now is that 2-3 years ago, if you wanted to create an application, you would have to go create an entire stack. It's not surprising that today there's a very different behavior. People who want to build something immediately say, okay, do I need to build everything? Let me look at OpenDaylight. Does it have the southbound I want? Yes, great. Can I write into the MD-SAL? Great. Maybe there's something I don't need. Maybe there's something that I need that's not there. Well, I can go out and contribute to a network service or leverage a base network function. What you have is not a product that has been built to solve any one specific problem. We have 50 of those already. What we have built is a broad platform, a framework that multiple people are leveraging, taking the components that they want to put together a package that meets their needs. We have truly built a platform for SDN and NFV. And what this means is that rather than people having to reinvent the wheel over and over again by rebuilding non-differentiating components, where we are today in SDN is that you can focus on your secret sauce. Whether you are a small startup vendor, one of the largest companies in the world, say like someone like Ericsson, that has built 3 products, in fact, on OpenDaylight, or whether you're an end user who is building something to manage their network. You can focus on your secret sauce. Some of you may have heard this. This gentleman up here, his name is John Donovan. He's the senior EVP of AT&T. And I think he said that really, really well. He's one of the guys who gets it. As he looks at his company, there are almost no companies in the world for whom networking is as important as it is for AT&T. Their ability to leverage the network is critical to almost everything that they do. Yet when he looks at his network, He could easily say, I'm going to reinvent, I'm going to rebuild, I'm going to build a better network end to end. I'm going to sign contracts with vendors to give me exclusive technology. Instead, what he says is, you know what? Secret sauce secret sauce is like Tabasco. It should come in small containers. He goes further and says, open source thus far has only been a small part of what we've done at AT&T. It's been 5%. But we see that this is the key to be able to go where we need to go. I'm setting a goal for my entire organization to take us to more than 50%. What a change that we've seen. A few years ago, people were asking, is SDN real? Is NFV real? And here you have one of the largest companies in the world saying very clearly to everyone, yes, SDN is real. Yes, we're investing in it. Yes, OpenSDN is real, and putting their money where their mouth is. In fact, AT&T has been one of the largest investors in OpenSDN from the end user side, not simply going to a standards body giving their requirement, but actually investing their capabilities in OpenDaylight, in Onos, and in a few other places. What we've seen with AT&T is them send people to things like developer forums to be able to actually start engaging. In fact, last time I checked, a couple weeks ago, they had 10 people registered for this show, more than most other end users that you see out there. Very, very impressive. I don't want to steal too much of their thunder because I've invited them to come and speak here, and in fact, you'll hear more about their story shortly. But this isn't theoretical. They have SDN in production today. They're offering a network on demand service, and it's built on OpenDaylight. And so I'm so happy that right after me, I'll be inviting Al Blackburn to come in and talk about that Uber vision that they have. But then we'll have Margaret Kiyoshi and Brian Freeman going into the next level of detail, explaining exactly how they're thinking about bringing all their disparate parts of their infrastructure together in one. I'd love to tell Al that they've succeeded, they've got the idea, nobody else has realized it. The truth is, they're probably a little bit ahead of a lot of other folks. But I'm seeing a wave sweep across the entire telco industry. I'm seeing carrier after carrier after carrier reiterate to me the importance for them to be able to bring agility back in their network. They see the threat of over-the-top providers and realize that network agility is critical to being able to not only compete and match, but in fact out-innovate their competitors. Here's a great example. Telstra, for those who don't know, is the largest carrier in the Australia-New Zealand marketplace. As many companies based in Australia and New Zealand, they have to be global because their customers are global. And so when they looked at the challenges of connecting across all the different points and presence that they had, they realized that they needed a controller. The capability that they wanted was the ability, like many of you, to self-provision dynamically the network services that they needed to be able to offer. And when they looked out there, we talked a little bit about the MD SAL. What they realized was a simple way of doing it was to build this as an application on top of the model-driven service abstraction layer. So with their partner Mirantis, that's exactly what they did. And if you want to know more about this, I urge you to go to their session on Wednesday at 1:30. Martin Foster from Telstra and Dmitry Andrushko from Mirantis will be talking about implementing OpenDaylight at the large carrier provider. Some of you may have heard the story of the blind men touching the elephant, and the guy who touches the tail thinks it's a snake, and the guy touching an ear thinks it's something different. I get the same thing. People will come to me and say, wow, OpenDaylight, you've done really well with telcos. What about enterprises? Or people who come to me and say, wow, I really think you're an enterprise-based thing. What about the telcos? Is that other project? Well, interestingly enough, in our goal to build a platform, I'm seeing engagement across the wide range of different end users. And so let me switch gears here and talk about one of the companies that operates one of the highest scale networks in the world, but they're not a carrier. If you've never been to China, you may never have heard of this company. but you should look them up. The name of the company is Tencent. And what they do is they make games as well as they make messaging applications. Sounds like an interesting business. Why am I so excited about them? Well, they make quite a bit of money. To be more specific, last year they brought in over $13 billion. And they do that at an incredibly high profit margin, 30% profit. What this means is if you compare them to their peers, in fact, they make more money, they make more profit than Facebook, Amazon, eBay, Twitter, and Yahoo combined. That's quite impressive. To give you an idea of the scale at which they operate, they have not one, but 2 applications that have over 500 million users. In fact, I read somewhere that they calculated that at any given time, they have had peaks of up to 125 million people hitting their servers at once. Absolutely mind-boggling scale. So just like AT&T, when Tencent looks at their network, what do they say? This is critical to our future. And so what do? They go in and they're going to say, not invented here, we're going to hire all the smartest people, put them in the room, and reinvent everything, right? No. Actually, there's some other guys who do that, but not Tencent. What do? They come to OpenDaylight and they said, we want a broad SDN platform, and we're going to build our infrastructure on top of OpenDaylight. They began with something called the Data Center Interconnect Controller. This is an MD-SAL application. It leverages PCEP, and it is used already today in their network. In fact, they have been using this for over a year. And one of the most interesting things that I heard from them is I asked them, how important is this to your network? Is this just a side project or is this critical? And they said, well, I'll tell you how serious we are. We have told all of our vendors that if you don't interoperate with OpenDaylight by year end, I'm going to go somewhere else. I'm going to pick someone else. Pretty impressive. And I'm seeing this over and over again. So on step 3, if we think about it, we've brought everyone together, we've built something, and end users not only are starting to test it, they're deploying it in an environment that is critical to their business. And in every case, while most of them ask me not to make forward-looking statements, in private they share with me their visions. And it's incredible the number of parts of their businesses touched by what they're building on the OpenDaylight platform. And so what I'm hearing over and over again, and this is the critical part, is SDN and NFV is critical to people's ability to make money. And this is why I'm excited that we're going to continue to get investment in OpenDaylight. Now, some of you may remember my first slide. I talked about being open and changing the world. Yet thus far, I've talked about helping companies make more money, and that's good. We're all in business. But what about changing the world? Any Canadians in the room? 1, 2, 3, yeah, about 15. Anybody know what this is a picture of? It's in Quebec. No? They're called les chutes du Montmorency. The Montmorency Falls. And they're in fact one of the meccas of ice climbing in the world. I have dreamt of climbing this waterfall for many, many years. Unfortunately, I've never done it yet. If you live in Quebec, you might think you've had enough of snow. Yet, in fact, they're very concerned because some of their biggest treasures in the world are at threat from something we all know very well here in California, global warming. And so they've taken a step. Why am I telling you about this? Because the government of Quebec has created a public-private partnership to build the world's first green cloud. What's a green cloud? Is that just a smart grid? Sort of. But really, it's a smart grid on steroids. The idea behind the green cloud is to be able to connect with a wide range of sensors, to be able to pull information from water, from lighting, from security, match that with information from the cloud, from weather satellites, street lights. The idea is If we could get data from all of these areas, we could actually create optimizations, not just to save money, but in fact to dramatically lower our energy use. Lots of people go to international conferences and promise to reduce their energy expenditure by 20%. But the next obvious question is how? This is a great example of someone taking a proactive step to do that. Why am I telling you this? Because guess what? At the heart of being able to save energy and protect those waterfalls is the network. How do you build a green cloud? Well, the first thing you have to be able to do is spin up VMs like that. And so they turn to OpenStack. But the other piece is you have to be able to spin up the network like that. And so they turned to OpenDaylight. And so today, this thing is up. It is functioning. We're talking hundreds of cores, hundreds of terabytes. So not the biggest implementation of OpenStack you've ever seen, but not the smallest either. And they've got an ambitious plan to take this to the next level. As you see, this has been built with the help of a number of our OpenDaylight members here you see on the bottom of the slide. Now that sounds great, and you can tell your friends about having heard about this. It sounds really neat, but is that big enough? Is that really world-changing? So great, I'll be able to climb those falls in 15 years. Do you have a bigger example, Neela? Can we get more fundamental? Well, I'm glad you ask. Because fundamentally speaking, I can't get any bigger than the Large Hadron Collider. So for those of you who are not familiar with the LHC is the largest particle accelerator in the world. It is sitting in Switzerland, run by the CERN organization. But here's something really interesting about it. They're accelerating those particles, they're getting a massive amount of data, and obviously they're analyzing that data. Yet there are only a certain number of physicists who can go in and sit. One of my friends, actually, he's a professor at Boston University. He went and spent 6 months analyzing this data at CERN, but then he wanted to go home, back to Boston, back to his family. Their big question is, how do we leverage the global community? They began by saying, okay, we're going to pick the 13 top institutions in the world, and we're going to send them our data. Now, unless you think this is an easy task, we're talking 200 plus terabytes of data that have to be sent. Huge success, more eyeballs, bigger community, more research. But guess what happened? Lots of other people went, well, what about us? What they found was as they looked through, there were hundreds more institutions that wanted to help them, that wanted to collaborate on their projects. In fact, they identified 160 Tier 2 research sites and 300 Tier 3 sites. And the question is, could we get the data to them? Unfortunately, the answer without an SDN controller is no, not really easily. And so they began a quest a few years ago to build a technology to enable them to solve this problem. They started with POX because that's what was out there. And then they went to Floodlight. And where have they finally landed? In the OpenDaylight community. They began with hydrogen, implemented helium. They've got a plan to deploy on lithium. And in fact, I urge you to come to our website in about a month. We have a wonderful video of Harvey Newman, the head scientist there who's leading this project, talking about what they've done with OpenDaylight. I wanted him here today, but unfortunately, he was needed somewhere else in the world for critical research. What's interesting when we talk to these folks is once again why it is that they picked OpenDaylight. Because interestingly enough, their initial use case doesn't use 100 different South Mountain protocols. In fact, it was primarily based on OpenFlow. Why did they pick OpenDaylight? Why are they investing in OpenDaylight? Why is Harvey Newman now an advisor on our advisory group? The reason is just like AT&T, just like Telstra, just like Quebec, they realize the value of a platform. They realize more than others the value of a network, and in this case, a network of people. When we asked them why they picked OpenDaylight, they said, OpenDaylight has become a de facto standard. We're in the business of facilitating collaboration among a wide range of researchers. We love that that is OpenDaylight's mission too, and we get the value that comes from Metcalfe's law. And I'm hearing this over and over again. I could give you 10 more examples like this, but we don't have time. And so I do want to answer one question I get asked all the time. Well, Neela, that sounds great. You want to be everything to everyone. That sounds awesome. You're having some great success. But I'm Cartesian. Help me segment what you're seeing right now. Okay. 4 major use cases that I'm seeing today for OpenDaylight. I don't think this is where we're going to be in 5 years, but this is what I see today. Number 1, and I should say some of you are going to tell me this is an SDN, and that's okay. Number 1 thing I hear from people is, hey, I have a whole set of hardware in my environment. I have no central way of being able to look at that. I have no central way of understanding what's going on there. I have no central way of being able to manage that. I've been looking for some kind of management and orchestration layer. I keep getting promised it. I don't see one. You know what? It's not really it's not my long-term goal with OpenDaylight, but I can show immediate value by being able to connect to hardware and start doing some level of centralized monitoring, management, and orchestration. In fact, in a humorous interlude during one of the advisory group meetings, one of our advisors sheepishly said, you know, we've been trying to do some level of network management and orchestration for years, and they won't let us spend time on it. By talking about OpenDaylight and calling it open source, suddenly we can do what we've been asking to be able to do. Is that SDN? In some sense, who cares? It's a great starting point. So the first one is people taking the network that they have and driving immediate value. The second big one is the opposite of that. We see this at carriers, we see this at enterprises. There are areas in which you absolutely want and you absolutely need to be able to do proactive, reactive network management, traffic engineering, to be able to go down to the level of the app traffic or even down to the flow. And you've seen some of those examples in the case studies we've gone through before. What's interesting is you have 2 very different use cases here, and really what I'm seeing is people want a bridge from A to B. There's the network that they have, and there's the network that they want, and it's going to take us 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, depending on what we're talking about to get there. What they see in OpenDaylight is a platform that can solve both sides of that, where other things that they're looking at solve one thing relatively well, but they'll know they'll have to abandon for a different use case. So that's that first part. The second set of use cases I hear are really more of these greenfield cases. And both of them are common in that they leverage OpenStack. I'm not going to talk too much about NFV because you're going to hear a lot about it from other folks out there. In fact, Al Blackburn will go in some detail how they think about their network at AT&T here. But I think what is clear is that people realize that the virtualization of VMs is critical, not because by itself it's going to save some direct money, although it might, but really that once you're able to virtualize away from the physical appliance, your hands have now been unshackled, and there's so many more things that you can do. And the impact of that is broad. If you're delivering gear to customers, you'd much rather deliver a VM and be able to replace that VM rather than deliver a box. If you've got a data center delivering services, you want to be able to spin it up and down. And therefore, we could talk about whether we're talking CPE, EPC, service chaining. NFV is real, it's here, and it's seeing tremendous investment. And the final one, as we talked about with Quebec, obviously, a lot of the new architectures have been built cloud native. Started with VMs. People are more and more excited about containers right now. I will say the majority of people I talk to right now are looking for a solution to OpenStack. They like a lot of things about OpenStack, but the thing they like the least is the networking piece. And they're looking to a controller to be able to deliver networks on demand, but not just simply an overlay, but be able to have one single way of managing the overlay and the underlay. So that's what I'm seeing. Do I have any data to back this up? Well, in fact, we went out and we did a survey. We got 128 users of OpenDaylight, responded to a wide range of companies, telcos, enterprises, research institutions, and they're confirming a lot of things that I have told you thus far. Just shy of 3/4 of them have said they have deployed or are planning to deploy OpenDaylight in production. What are they doing with OpenDaylight? Well, it looks eerily similar to what I've been seeing anecdotally. Number 1, NFV. Number 2, cloud orchestration. Number 3, the fulfillment, the ability to deliver new network services. And number 4, network monitoring and analytics. I wonder if those people who are doing the 4th are as sheepish as the gentleman from my advisory group. What are their business drivers? Exactly what you would expect. Number 1, interoperability. I think this is why they're picking OpenDaylight versus other things. They don't want 50 different solutions in the network that don't work with each other. They want one. OpenDaylight gives the promise of that. The others, frankly, are more about value of SDN, increased operational efficiency, lower cost, as well as the ability to innovate and compete in their market. And so what I'm seeing is end users care. They care deeply. And I'm so happy to share that since the last time I was up in front of you, we have seen significantly greater engagement. As I was talking about Harvey Newman from Caltech, other researchers, other telcos, enterprises like the NASDAQ stock market, people in America, people in Europe, people in China, all are coming together to engage deeply with the OpenDaylight project. And I'm proud to share that Tencent, the company I was talking about earlier, has agreed verbally to me to join the advisory group and provide their input into OpenDaylight. And with that, I wanted to pause to show you a brand new video that we created to tee up the next section of my presentation.
It's one of the first things we learn. The world we share is made of countless moving parts, all working together. Sometimes the process is messy. You don't always know where you're going. Some of the best contributions come from the most unexpected places. But it's embracing the unpredictable that makes our best work possible. Today, people are working together more than ever, inventing new tools, building new ecosystems. Every new thing we make is a chance to express who we are. Look around at the world we share, and you'll see our best ideas in action. People working together to build what no one person could ever build alone. The world we share is fueled by collaboration. The worlds we build should be too.
And so I now want to talk a little bit about the bigger movement that we are part of. Because what we're seeing is that there is a wave sweeping through the IT industry. We're moving from an old model where people were closed. People raised prior to the internet believed that information needed to be kept close to themselves. They shared only a little bit of information with their team, a little bit less with the broader company, and certainly even less more broadly to their customers. We're seeing a shift towards a more open way of being, a more open way of working. I believe that the era of standards wars is over. Showing up and sending a set of scientists to a standards body to brawl over whether or not you're going to win that standards battle, to be able to get your technology, which you've already invested in for years, baked in as a standard so you can get an advantage over everybody else. That model isn't working. It's not working for the industry. It's not working for the end user. We are entering a new age of collaboration. Some of you may know I'm a cyclist. I love to cycle. And I think that there's something really interesting about cycling. Some of you may recognize this gentleman that you see here with the Movistar helmet. His name is Nairo Quintana. He just came second in the Tour de France. What you might not know is this: in this individual sport, there's tremendous collaboration. Yes, with your team. You can see here in a time trial. But in fact, he spends more time collaborating with his competitors than he does with his teammates. Because in fact, what you realize in cycling is that when you draft behind another rider, you spend 30% less energy. And so this is Alberto Contador, here in the yellow. He is probably his biggest competitor, other than maybe Chris Froome. Yet what you find is they realize that it makes more sense to continually collaborate, to help each other until that final moment when it's time to compete, and then they compete incredibly fiercely. This is the change that we're seeing in our industry. Rather than compete over everything, we have realized that it makes more sense to collaborate openly within our teams, but actually collaborate with our competitors until that moment that we think that we can win the market, and then we compete. It's not just about networking. It's not just about OpenDaylight. This wave is sweeping the entire industry. If you've been following a broader trend, what you find is whether we're talking about things like the Internet of Things, whether we're talking about platform as a service, container management, container orchestration, even the core infrastructure at the heart of the internet, you're seeing foundation after foundation being spun up to facilitate bitter competitors who don't agree on the vast majority of things, to create an environment where they can come together and begin that road towards agreement, standardization, and collaboration. When you see someone like Google and Docker coming together in the Open Container Initiative, it is not that they agree on the vast majority of things with containers. In fact, if you follow this, they disagree on many, many things. Is that they realize that it makes much more sense. They have a much higher likelihood of getting where they want by collaborating together on a whole set of core activities before they then branch off and compete where they need. I didn't mention OPNFV, and I should have. This is certainly a very important project, and I assume most people here know quite a lot about it. I was recently on a stage, though, and someone expressed a level of doubt that I have heard recently, and I want to address here. This person who is a key thought leader in networking basically ambushed me on stage. And he asked this question. He said, you know, this all sounds great. I share your vision of changing an industry, but I just don't believe that established vendors are willing to change. And in fact, he turned to a VC and he asked the VC, he said, what do you think? Is it startups who are going to change the world, or is it the existing industry? And the VC shockingly said, startups. What's interesting if we look is that there are two models to change. One is destruction, the other is renovation. For most of history, we did renovation, but recently we've gotten very excited about disruption. In fact, there's a whole conference called Disrupt. I argue that we should be very leery of people who simply want to wipe off everything that's there. If what you need is a new kitchen, don't knock down your house. Instead, rebuild the kitchen. And I think that there are too many people in this world who think that we should just attack vendors, that anybody who's been in business for 25 years is inherently evil. They'll inherently drag their feet and they don't want to change. There's probably some truth in that. But here's the question. If you're an end user, put yourself in the shoe. What is it that you want to say to your established vendor? Do you want to say, I've fully lost faith in your ability to be my vendor for the future. I'm going to go and try and replace you as soon as I can. Sounds great. You pick a startup, guess what? They're going to buy that startup. Theoretical? No. It's happened a few times recently. Well, I'm going to go to a university and they're going to build me my commercial product that I'm going to use at the heart of my network. Oh, wait. That's not going to work. The only way that we're going to be able to change is by evolving what we have. Then the obvious question is, won't people try to control that and drag their feet? Sure, and that's why we have an open source license. That's why we have a broad community. That's why we have a governance structure to ensure that we get the right collaboration. And we're doing a phenomenal job of this. But there is one big concern that I have. And I want to talk specifically to all of you who either code for OpenDaylight or pay somebody to code for OpenDaylight. Too often, what I am seeing is as a collaborative project, we come together to collaborate and then go in and create our own little silos. It's a step in the right direction. At least you're in the same tent. But true collaboration won't come from creating your own project with all of your own colleagues from your company and working primarily with them. It's a small improvement, but that's not the real improvement. I'm most proud of the community when I see people collaborating with folks outside with a different perspective and a different geography. And I think we can see more of that, and we will see more of that. You know, there's a rule for prioritization. Fools think that prioritization is about the order in which you do things. Completely useless. The wise know that true prioritization is deciding what not to do. And there's a similar rule for collaboration. Fools think collaboration is getting other people to do things your way. They may not say it this way, but I see it over and over again, which is, hey, I want to collaborate. What do you mean? Well, I've got this great technology, and I'm going to bring it in, and other people are going to leverage it because it's so awesome. Guess what? That almost never works. Collaboration means accepting from the get-go that we is greater than me. The litmus test for collaboration, if you ask yourself, how collaborative are you? With your spouse, with your friend, with your colleagues, as a team, as an organization. The simple way of knowing how collaborative you are is asking, how often have you changed your mind? How often have you changed your plan? Are you walking in the meeting room? Are you walking in the IRC chat, expecting and being willing to do things differently that may not be in your suboptimal interest, but you're willing to do it because you get the bigger picture? And so with that, I want to leave you with one final thought. Many of you work for very large corporations. If you work for a smaller one, this applies to you too. And what we see is that the overlap between people who work in that corporation, people who work on a project like OpenDaylight, is that it's actually a minority of the employees. You are unique in your company. You are unique in your world in that you have tasted and experienced something that seems so foreign to almost everybody else within your corporation. The idea that we can be open, that any email that you sent can be looked at by almost anyone else, that you will sit down and help a competitor get set up, have their environment work, is foreign. The idea that you can believe in a broader vision and collaborate with your competitor, just like Nairo Quintana, more often than you compete, is a foreign notion. I'm often asked, what is the one key thing that will determine OpenDaylight's success? And I will tell you, it is about the ambassadors of open. Every single one of you in this room has the potential to be an ambassador of open. When you meet people and tell them that you've been here, when you meet people and talk about what it is that you're doing, Chris Price at Ericsson, for example, has to explain over and over and over again what open collaboration is all about. And this is true for so many of you here. And so really the question and the ask that I have of all of you is, how much effort are you going to make in being a strong advocate for open collaboration, a strong advocate for OpenDaylight? Because for each one of you here, there are 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 people who care and should be impacted by that. I believe that we're part of a revolution. There's a wave that is coming, but I can't do it by myself. I need all of you as a community to be out there with me advocating for this change. And with that, I would like to invite one of the top ambassadors of open in the world, my good friend Al Blackburn from AT&T, who, as I said, will share a little bit about their vision. Thank you very much. You don't want to touch it. Think about for a second if you're balancing a whole set of dice up on your kitchen table, and your 4-year-old walks in the room, what's the first thing that you do? Don't touch that. We're in a place where for networking, our networks are fragile enough that we don't want to make changes. In fact, making a change is risky. Making a change to the network is costly, and therefore it's something that we avoid. And so as we move into a world in which networking touches us in almost every way, whether now we're looking up a phone number, looking up our grades, booking a holiday house, or even if we think about it, what's going on within your car today, even prior to connected cars, we're already at a place that almost every part of our lives relies on the network. And so it is clear, I don't think there's anybody in this room that doubts the assertion that as we think forward 20 years, not only will the network be part of almost every major innovation that we will see, but that the network as it's... All right, good morning, everybody. All right, come on, one more time. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Awesome. Well, I have to say, I am so happy that all of you have decided to spend your valuable time to be here with us this morning. You know, when we decided we were looking at different dates and we picked a date in the summer, there was a lot of stress among the team around would people be willing to come and show up. We also doubled the admissions price to come. And I think that there was a concern among everyone that maybe there would be 3 people sitting right up here that I would be presenting to. And I'm so happy to announce that we had a 20% growth in the number of attendees from the last time we did this to this. Before I jump into my presentation, I want to thank all of our sponsors, especially our platinum sponsors, without whom this show would not be possible. So what I want to go through with you for the next 45 minutes is really 2 things. First, I want to talk a little bit more about where we've been. How are we doing in terms of this big, broad vision that I first introduced at the last summit? But then I want to take a slightly different tack and talk about a bigger trend that we're seeing in the industry that we're all very much part of. So I hear there are a few geeks in the audience. For those of you who are geeks, does anybody know what we're talking about in that slide at the top left-hand corner of the screen? Someone shout it out. ARPANET, very good. And the 2 gentlemen below it? All right, perfect. The 2 gentlemen invented TCP. And you know, before we talk about anything else, I think it's important to start with a little bit of context, which is what I think that many people in this room understand, but very few people outside of this room understand, is that our modern society is built on top of networks. Yet the fundamental architecture of networks, the way that networks have managed, have for the most part not changed that much since these gentlemen started putting together the technology required for the dawn of the internet. In fact, what we've seen is that the evolution of network, rather than creating something with an idea and a vision of where it was going to go and thinking about the right architectural concepts, what we've done is we've kept adding a little bit of duct tape and a little bit of paper clips there and painting over the part that was fallen apart. And it's amazing, in fact, given that that's the way that we've evolved the architecture of the internet, that that's the way that we've evolved the architecture of fundamental networking, that it does so much for us. But if you've gone to any standards conference over the last 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, it probably goes back beyond that, you've heard the same thing over and over again, which is we know that to be able to go where we know that we're going, we need a fundamental re-architecture of the network. The way that the network runs right now, again, whether we're talking public internet, whether we're talking in your business in a research institution, we know that it needs to change. And the first question is why? Well, one of the challenges when something is fragile is that it's been built today will not be able to accommodate that change unless it evolves. And so the question is how? You know, when I began, and some of you in this room began to talk about the vision of OpenDaylight, many people listened and said, that sounds really great. That's a great vision. We really like it. But invariably, after a sigh, people got to the next set of questions. And they said, well, that sounds great, but, and then you got a list of questions, a list of challenges. Anybody who's spent time in a standards body like the IETF has seen effort after effort to standardize the industry around a new idea, a new technology, fail and fail over and over again. Anybody who's tried to do it by creating the next great startup that's going to disrupt all of the incumbents has had the experience, and invariably, they don't quite achieve what they were hoping to achieve.